Okay.
Tiger is 2-1, so they were doing it for me.
Roger. And is 2-3 going to use these Scorpion Tiger flights?
They can't until they get the people out.
Okay. Is he going to use them on the road out there or something?
I don't know.
Well, Rich, as I've thought about this and talked with you about some of these things over the last few days, and I had the powerful experience of reading a terrific book written by a fellow lieutenant who went to war right out of pilot training. It happened to be in 1966, and the guy was flying the F-105 Thud up over Hanoi, doing 100 missions to complete their tour, 100 missions over North Vietnam. And the guy wrote a terrific book called When Thunder Rolled. And I read that book, and the thing that struck me, and where I want to go with this, is into the subject of courage. And here's a guy who went through pilot training and was high in his class, wanted to fly a fighter, became a fighter pilot in the F-105, and then all of a sudden the war kicks up and he's going to war. And it's a different paradigm for him now, because he has to think about, I didn't really want to sign up for this. I'm going to get shot at, and it's dangerous, and a lot of guys are not living through 100 missions over the north. And the guy was literally afraid. And he goes on to become a fantastic fighter pilot and does great things as a F-105 pilot. But his first thought is, how do I get out of this? And then he evolves to the point of, well, it's going to be embarrassing to quit, but maybe I'll fly one mission, and then I can quit after that. I will have done it, and it won't be as bad. And so it evolves, and he goes through a number of missions and finds out that he can essentially conquer that fear that he had and go out and do the job. And it just struck me from a point of view that I had never really considered. Because when I went, my own experience was going through the academy, and there was a war going on. It was our duty and our obligation, and a lot of us going to pilot training knew we'd be going to Vietnam, and we volunteered to be there, and we thought it was the right thing to do. And looking back on it, I probably had some normal apprehensions, but they were more in the area of, am I going to measure up, and am I going to be able to do the job, and am I going to be competent, and am I going to be able to get the job done? And I felt like, never for a minute was I actually afraid. So then it dawned on me that looking at the guys that I had flown with, and everyone knew there were guys that were afraid and were going out there and flying, and some guys had that look in their eye that you wondered if they really were not going to make it back. And some guys were, full of bravado and bold about what they were doing. And I realized there had to be a really wide spectrum of guys, from guys on the end where they really weren't fearful at all to guys that were terrified. And then beyond that, it sort of struck me that, which is the greater courage? Is it the guys like me that weren't really afraid in the first place? We were young and bulletproof. Or was it these guys who, overcame that fear, had families back home, had, a lot of other things going on that we didn't, and they went out and did the job and did it in an exemplary manner day after day after day. And so I just thought that was something that might be of interest to chat about a little bit, think about. And it's something that in 50 years I've never had conversations about with all these guys. And yet we all know there was probably that spectrum deep down inside. We probably knew that was the case, but we never really talked about it. We never really talked about it would be okay to be over on one end or the other. So I just thought that might be interesting.
As you and I were discussing, one of the things you brought up here is nobody's spoken much over the years about their experiences. And we were talking this morning, and I think you alluded to the fact that opening up now is its own type of bravery. Is that not what we were discussing, or how does that? Because a lot of guys have held it in, and as I was telling you, I've had several people come up and they've said, the first time was hard. It was really hard to talk about this stuff, but the more I do it, the more I'm letting go of things that I didn't know were inside of me. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that's totally true. my own reflections over the years have been that, I just felt like I was lucky. I was in a lot of bad places during my year in combat, and I was involved in a lot of big rescues and a lot of, dangerous scenarios. But I never really felt like I had any kind of post-traumatic stress or any of that kind of thing. I never had a personal need to go back and see the areas that we had flown in. I know a lot of guys had different experiences, and probably, again, similar to that spectrum of dumb and stupid courage versus, overcoming your fear type courage. There probably is a wide range of thought among guys about the experiences that they had and how that impacted and affected them going forward. I felt like it didn't really impact me, and I didn't have nightmares or wake up with, concerns or feel like I'd been dreaming about being back in Vietnam. Having said that, undoubtedly there was some, lasting impact of all that. Certainly memories seared indelibly into your brain from missions that you flew, where you can remember every detail of everything that happened because it was so attention-getting at the time. So I think there's probably a wide range of reactions that people have had to the experiences that they had, and for some they've probably been carrying a lot of baggage. For the rest of us, we're probably carrying baggage we're still not fully aware of.
One of the things that I've kind of heard as I've been listening to guys, I don't think they actually kept count of the number of people they rescued or the count of the people that weren't rescued, but deep down they know there was a score. And yesterday I asked one of the pilots, I said, what was the emotion like? Can you tell me what it was like to rescue somebody? Could you tell me what it was like from your perspective when you knew you got a guy out? And that was your job as SOS, was Special Operations Squadron, was to go in and rescue guys. You did a lot of other things, correct? But
right.
That was the primary goal. That's why you guys were air commandos, and that's what you did. I don't think many people know what an air commando is. Could you lead us in with that and kind of tell us about the experience?
Yeah, it's a little hard to thumbnail, but I'll take a shot at it.
Sorry.
We were called a Special Operations Squadron, and we had a special mission. We called ourselves Fighter Squadron, and the designation of the squadron actually changed over time from 602nd Fighter Squadron to 602nd Fighter Squadron parentheses C for Commando, and then it became the 6th Special Operations Squadron, and then ours was the 602nd, which ran through the same changes in designations. And yeah, we had very specialized missions, and Pleiku had different missions from NKP, Nakhon Phanom, where I was in Thailand. But doing the Sandy mission, which was strictly, the Sandy call sign was used when we were on a rescue mission. And to complete one of those rescue missions successfully and pull one of your buds, one of your fellow Air Force or Navy compatriots or Marines in some cases, out of the jungle and out of harm's way was a mission that was unparalleled in the entire war. And many of the missions were BS missions. You're going out and bombing a suspected truck park, and sometimes you had a 2-year-old photo of a bunch of trees and a bunch of coordinates that put you over that spot, and it looked completely different when you got there. It was very hard to narrow into what the real target was. It was there was a lot of trepidation because you were hoping you were in the right place, and sometimes you were doing that under a flare at night trying to find an 8-digit coordinate in the middle of the jungle. And sometimes there were Laotian friendlies around, and you sometimes gritted your teeth and confirmed with your wingman we really are in the right spot, right? And then you'd throw down a napalm so you'd had something on the ground to work from. But sometimes those targets were just totally nebulous and total BS. It was sortie count or getting rid of bombs over the jungle rather than really getting something worthwhile done. So when you had a worthwhile mission, whether it was a real target or more specifically when you had a guy on the ground that you were trying to rescue and get out of there, that was the top mission and the top feeling to be able to do that successfully.
Did you? I'm sorry.
And on the flip side, when you couldn't get a guy out, it was depressing. Or when you got one guy out, like we got Woody out, but we didn't get Ben on Boxer 2-2, and I was on another rescue with Ed Winter. He reminded me he was my wingman for that mission. It was a Navy F4, and before we got there, the backseater was surrounded by guys and said on the radio, "I guess I'm a POW." And we got the front seater out in a really effective, short, quick SAR, but it was a mixed bag. Here we got one guy out, and there weren't many prisoners returned from Laos, but this guy actually was.
That's very good. Did you ever pull a prairie fire mission?
Not specifically. The prairie fire was a specialized infill, exfil operation that was run by the hobos, the first SOS in the beginning. But I was on a major rescue effort for a prairie fire that went south, and it was one of the largest rescue efforts in all of Southeast Asia.
Which one was that?
It was called Knife 6162.
Okay.
It was October 6th, 1969, and the mission started off as a prairie fire infill, exfil, infill actually, where they had 2 helicopters, at least 2. There may have been more, but two helicopters ended up being shot down on this LZ that was landing zone that was supposed to be benign and not have a bunch of bad guys around it. It was about 15 or 20 miles west of a bad place called Chapone, and the first SOS, first Special Ops Squadron, was doing the infill. That was their job. Their squadron commander, who was notoriously not a very good pilot, was the guy leading the flight. And they made a couple perfunctory passes and decided to put this team in. Now the helicopters each had 4 American crew members, and they had on board 26 Thai and Laotian mercenaries. That was the nature of this type of operation. So they put the first helicopter in there, and when they got in the hover, turned out there were 500 to 1,000 North Vietnamese troops surrounding this LZ at a little place called Muang Phin. They shot down the first helicopter. The hobos went through the process to try to, not knowing what they were facing and having been told by intel reports that the area was benign, they put the second helicopter in to complete the infill, pick up the crew of the first helicopter, and they got the second helicopter shot down in the same spot. So the Sandy forces were launched. Jim Monk was the Sandy lead, who's passed away a couple of years ago, a great guy. Stu Bischoff was his wingman. I don't know who 3 and 4 were. They were out there for hours pounding the area around this LZ and trying to protect the guys on the ground. And then
so there's 50 plus guys on the ground.
60.
60.
52 plus 8.
Wow.
Yeah, it was amazing, and so this turned into a full-blown big SAR. Jim and the first set of Sandys out there put in all kinds of fast movers from all around the theater, expended their own ordnance. As it ended up, the guys on the ground were there for 6 hours. And so I was launched with the second set of Sandys, and we were actually supposed to be the high element. Jack Hudson was the guy that I was flying the wing of on my first really big SAR. And Jack ended up leading the rescue effort, so we ended up being the low element, and he was awarded the Air Force Cross for completing this mission, so it was a big deal. And we had just combined the wing missions where we were all doing everything. The 2 guys who were supposed to be the low element were Tom Dayton and John Dyer, and when we departed, we had a radial and DME distance off of NKP, And Jack and I both checked it on our maps, and we were going this way, and they were going that way a little bit. And he called me on our individual squadron radio and said, I'm showing this. And I said, that's what I got. So as a result of their slight navigation error, we got there first. And the other guys were out of fuel, out of ordnance, and Tom, who was supposed to have taken over the lead, wisely said to Jack, he said, hey, you guys are there, you take it. And so we did, and we were down, dropping CBU and stuff very, very close to these guys as the LZ was being attacked by all these guys who were around it. And Jack is preparing the rescue effort and, coordinating everything, and we're both dropping CBU and strafing in close to these guys. And the most accurate thing we had were our guns. And we tried in what looked like it was going to be a protracted rescue effort to extend our ordnance by making single passes of CBU canisters and things like that. And at one point, these guys came up on the radio and said, Sandy's, we've got guys moving on us from the west. We need something on them now. And it was a scenario where Jack was just on the west side, just south of where they were. I was coming around as we flew around this LZ. I was coming around to the west side, and I didn't have room to maneuver you wanted to drop parallel to where your friendly guys were. And I didn't have room to do that, and it was, from the sound of their voices, it was urgent. So I just did a little kind of whifferdale extending out to the west, and I rolled back in toward these guys. And the most accurate thing we had were our guns. We had 4 20-millimeter cannons in the wings. We used them sparingly. We could select inboards or outboards, and so we usually fired. We saved that ammunition for when we needed it. And I just armed up the second set of guns and rolled in right toward these guys, and knowing pretty much where they were, but you're never 100% sure. And I held down the trigger till I couldn't stand it any longer and pulled off, and was successful. And later on, when I got back after we picked these guys up, so this is a quick flash forward. I'm in our TUOC, our intelligence facility, and these guys are in there that we picked up, and one of the crewmen is saying, yeah, so we had these guys moving in on us from the west, and they were coming through the grass, and I called the Sandys and said, hey, we got to have something on these guys now. And so this Sandy rolls in, and I see the guns flashing, and I hear the bullets going through the grass, and it's right in the right place, and it's getting closer and closer to us. And I put my head down, and it goes quiet. Something hits my hand, and I look up, and it's a piece of shrapnel from 20 Mike on the back of my hand. So you go, how did that happen? Did God tell me when to release that trigger, or you just have all those kind of thoughts. But eventually we picked these guys up, and we had some great helicopter pilots. We had just gotten the Super Jollies. The plan was to go in with one helicopter and pick up half of them, and the other helicopter and pick up the other half. But it's chaos and the fog of war. And when the first helicopter came in, all these indigenous troops were scrambling on board. The squadron commander of the helicopter squadron had been in the first helicopter and had been wounded. He was shot in the back, and there were guys on the ground that did some pretty heroic things. One of the guys ran back to one of the helicopters and got the machine gun out of it, and they were engaged in a battle for their lives there on the ground. And so we put this first helicopter in. We had guys from our squadron laying smoke screens and executing the plan that Jack had laid out, and everybody scrambled on board, and the helicopter guy said, I'm out, and we got a bunch of people on board, and then somebody comes up on the radio and says, hey, there's 3 of us left down here, and it's 3 Americans. And one of the Jolly guys, the helicopter guys, right on the spot, he goes, we're on final. And they came in, and they were in the LZ for not more than about 10 seconds and picked these guys up. So out of the 60 guys that were on the ground, we ended up picking up 54 guys, all 8 Americans, and most of the mercenary indigenous troops. So it was the biggest rescue effort
Had
ever
you
at that
not
point.
been there or been delayed, it would have been catastrophic for those guys.
It certainly could have been. It was a bad scenario.
I don't
And,
think people understand when it comes to, you know, we've all heard about Vietnam, but in Laos and Cambodia, it was I think, more intense war, and the Vietnamese were just, they would swarm. I've done a lot of interviews with the SOG guys, Special Operations Groups,
yeah.
and they would talk about how the Vietnamese and the North Vietnamese knew there were only so many good locations that we could put and infill teams, and they would set teams out there to just wait. And so their job was to just bait the trap. And when those guys hit the ground, from the moment they were on the ground, they were hunted. And one of the last reunions I was at, there was special operations guys, Green Berets, and there was a lot of Sandy pilots. And they both looked at each other and they were like, "You're the craziest guy I've ever seen." "No, you're the craziest guy. You would fly into all this?" And he's like, "On the ground, I had a chance." And the pilots are going, "I wanted no part of the ground, man." You guys were nuts to get out.
We had similar conversations with the helicopter guys, and we go cock the airplanes before first light, and we go to the club and have breakfast. And as we talked with them, sometimes it was, "I wouldn't do what you guys did for all the money in the world," So yeah, they were crazy, and some of them were phenomenal. It just great guys that
it takes a special breed to do your specific task.
And you had warriors and operators and fighter pilots that were helicopter pilots, as well as you had in the fighter arena, as we've discussed before.
You said the word operators, and could you just define what an operator is for the folks? Because they don't, many people don't know what an operator is.
Yeah, it's those guys that are going to overcome all the obstacles and are going to get the job done. They're going to MacGyver it. They're going to do whatever it takes, and they're super mission oriented and very capable, and they're in many cases overcoming obstacles imposed on them by higher headquarters or by the situation or whatever else. But they're the guys that are literally on the pointy end of the spear, that know how to do things. If they don't know how to do it, they'll figure out a way, and they're just going to go get the job done and get the mission done, and accomplish what needs to be done, and bend a rule here and there if necessary, but get the job done.
I really appreciate the time. Is there anything else that you'd like to cover?
Not now, but we'll do another SAR if you want later on.
That sounds good.
Hello, Sandy 2, Sandy 1. Go ahead. Are you with the Jollies this time? That's firm.
King 2, Silver Jolly Green 30, Victor on the run-in.
Say again, Alpha. Understand you. Copy 82 Bravo. Jolly, hold your position. Hold your position. Hello, 82 Bravo. Hello, 82 Bravo. Sandy 1, go ahead. Speak slower. 82 Bravo, speak slower. Sandy 1. Okay, where am I from you now? Where am I from you now? Say again, say again.
Okay, I want you to go back with 3 and 4. Go back with 3 and 4. We'll call you to execute as soon as we find Bravo. Okay, we're going back with 3 and 4. Alamo 3, King 2, 7.
82 Bravo, Sandy 1. How do you read now? You have insight? Have me in sight? Okay, I'm going to fly down the river. Tell me when I'm over your location,
A little bit longer until Alamo 2 gets in a little bit of shape.